So, Reach Around Russ, Belleville wrote a response to me and didn't give a link back to my article, which I don't care about the link back so much as I care about him addressing the actual facts that I brought up instead of propping up stickmen and putting up these fake narratives. So he references a review that I gave him on his new media station. I gave him 1 star, which he deleted. He didn't even leave that up, so now he's got all 5 stars, so that doesn't even show up anymore. Of course, he's into big censorship and, doesn't allow for detractors. But let's do this. Let's read what he had to write. His reasoning, to use the term loosely, was that I'm a big cheerleader for legalization in marijuana state under Initiative I-502. And so I'll just comment, piece by piece here. Actually, that was not the narrative. The narrative is that he's creating fake news. And I gave him credit. I said a lot of his media is spot on and well presented. He does good at a lot of his media. But he throws some fake facts in there. And so one of the fake facts that I referenced, and I'll show you on the actual review that I gave, which is a duplicate over at Cannabis Radio, and they left it. He broadcasts also on Cannabis Radio, so I left them a review as well. And since they left my comment and didn't delete it like Russ, I might go and change that rating from a 1 star to a 3 star. But what I was saying was that not only did Russ not ask the important questions to Allison Holcomb, the ACLU, and other legislators when he was doing his interviews back in 2012, he had the opportunity to, criticize them or ask them the important facts, or at least get more perspective on it. Everybody was complaining about it. It was a major resistance, and he didn't even address those topics when talking with Allison Holcomb. He was just her cheerleader. He got her on. He's like, oh, these detractors are all nut jobs and blah, 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 and I support you, Allison, just kissing her ass. He wanted some of that George Soros money. So anyway, I just criticized him for not reporting, on these things that everybody was questioning, not asking the hard questions to the legislators and the administrators and campaign, directors of these initiatives that everybody wanted to know the answers to, or at least wanted, to criticize these people about, about the no-grow provision. Nobody can grow under I-502 unless you've, qualified for a very expensive cannabis license. I mean, most people are way priced out of the market for even the application fee, which was $5,000. That was a non-refundable $5,000 fee just to apply, and there's no guarantee you'd get the license even after you paid that $5,000. So, the no-grow issue, all of the other provisions like DUID laws, more restrictive DUID laws, previous to I-502, like for example in 2012, people would have to prove impairment, or the state would have to prove impairment in court. Many people got their charges dropped because the state couldn't prove impairment. Now, if they can prove you just have as much as 5 nanograms, which is minuscule, tiny, then you're busted. There's nothing you can do to prove that you weren't impaired. It doesn't matter. And so these type of things he didn't ask, and that's what people criticized him for. And then the other issue is that Russ Belville made a big presentation when Bernie was running, and more than once he said that Bernie was the first major presidential candidate out of the 2 major parties to support legalizing cannabis completely. So that was wrong. That was absolutely false, because Ron Paul had worked with NORML, for example, for 30 years. I mean, he spoke for NORML. I gotta let my puppies out, sorry about the noise. He spoke for NORML in favor of decriminalizing cannabis completely. And other drugs. I mean, you can see Ron Paul on talk shows, radio shows, TV shows, saying that he wanted to decriminalize all drugs, and that was all the way back in the mid-'80s. And then he had a very strong presidential campaign. I believe it was stronger, that he had more support than Bernie Sanders did in 2012. So in 2016, Russ is saying, well, Bernie Sanders is the, first major political candidate out of the 2 parties to support legalizing cannabis, which was fake. And being that Russ still works for NORML, I think he's a director of Portland NORML, he was doing radio for NORML for several years, he should know that Ron Paul was a supporter of not only NORML, but fully ending the drug war, completely. But he, spins it, gives some fake news and saying that Bernie Sanders was the first. That's not true. Anyway, so I'll just go point by point. He says, for example, he quotes me, for example, before I-502, it was a misdemeanor for the largest group of cannabis consumers, 21 and below, to possess cannabis, and now after 502, it is a felony. He says, wrong, the change in penalties for minors was not contained in I-502, but in SB 5052, a bill from 2015. So I never said it was in I-502. I said that before I-502, it was a misdemeanor for the largest group of cannabis consumers, 21 and below, to possess cannabis. And now after I-502, it is a felony. And that's true. Even if it was changed in SB 5052, which it was, there was an incentive in the lingo of I-502 to restrict minors under the age of 21 from cannabis. And that's, what the stores are regulated as and everything else. Which was not the case under medical marijuana laws. You didn't have to be 21 or over. You could be any age. But now under I-502, they've got this whole guideline of 21 and over, and so the legislature seized upon that and made it a felony for minors under the age of 21 to receive a Class C felony for possession of small amounts of cannabis. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, and that was vetoed by the government. That's what he goes into saying, by the governor, that is. He was saying that in this response. And so I said, as everyone predicted, DUIDs are significantly higher after passing I-502, and that started immediately after the initiative became law, not just after stores opened. And he says, actually, according to Washington State Patrol's 2015 annual report, DUID arrests have decreased by 10% since 2014. The 2014 report shows a decrease of 8%. Okay, so that's still higher than it was in 2012, even if that's true. But I'll show you the numbers at the end here. NPR did a report on this, and they gave the numbers from the Washington State Patrol. And what I said about it increasing after 2012 is absolutely true. It was increasing by significant amounts, and it was still higher even in this decrease, this 10% decrease since 2014. It's still higher than it was in 2012 as far as DUID arrest. He says what he's hyperventilating about was found in the 2015 report's total number of Washington State impaired driving cases for testing. Why didn't you report on the link that I gave to NPR? They're a credible source, aren't they? He said from the state toxicology lab showing roughly 5,300 tests performed for drivers suspected of THC DUID in 2012 compared to roughly 7,000 performed in 2015. So that's 1,700 more in 2015 than in 2012, right? That's quite a bit more. That means these people were arrested, put in jail, and had to fight charges in court. That's not cheap, Russ. He said that looks bad until you read some more of the statistics. 18.6% of the 2012 drivers tested positive for THC, about 985 positives. 32.8% of the 2015 drivers were positive, about 2,310. And then he says, wait, isn't that even worse? You'd think so until you realize that in 2012 there was no 5 nanogram per se limit for THC. Any amount they detected meant you could be charged with DUID. That's 100% of 2012's 985 positives. True, but they had to prove in court impairment, which now they don't. They don't have to prove impairment. If you're over 5 nanograms, you're guilty. There's no contesting it. You're just guilty. In 2012, if you had 25 nanograms or 100 nanograms in your system, which many people do all the time, they had to prove that you were impaired. Now they don't. And so that's what makes this worse. He tries to give his simple reasoning, his little twist on it, but nothing can compare. And I'll show you at the end of this on my website, xcannabis.net, the statistics on that. And so he quotes me, as predicted, medical marijuana stores were regulated out of existence despite having been around problem-free for over 13 years in favor of highly taxed monopoly stores. Now, this not only happened with SB 5052, with the incentives of I-502, but during 2012, this was an issue with SB 5073 and supported by the ACLU, Allison Holcomb, and he did an interview with Allison Holcomb, who was pushing the I-502 campaign at this time. He interviewed Allison Holcomb and was just like, oh, this is great, we're going to have this, we're going to have that, collective gardens, stores, whatever, all this and that, you know, and he was just promoting it. He had no hard questions for Allison Holcomb. You know, most people, at least in the marijuana community, were very annoyed with it and upset with it, and were commenting on his page about it, and he didn't ask any of the hard questions about it in SB 5073. He didn't propose it in SB or in I-502 when he was interviewing Allison Holcomb, didn't ask her any of the hard questions about what those implications were and how they were addressed in I-502, and didn't criticize anything with I-502 with Allison Holcomb. When he got Allison Holcomb on his radio show, he was like, oh yeah, you're my buddy, and I totally support this I-502. This is great stuff. Didn't ask her any of the hard questions, didn't criticize any of it. Barely fluffed around on the issue. And that was the biggest problem. That was the fake news part. And so then he criticizes the idea of monopoly stores. So he's like, keep in mind, monopoly means several hundred licensed growers, processors, and retailers, and highly taxed, which I agree with, means 37%. That has been reduced from I-502's 20, 25, 25. So 37% is okay because it's reduced from the 75% or whatever it was before. I don't think so. I don't think 37% is good. Not only that, but a couple hundred stores compared to several thousand stores that existed before I-502 is the problem here. The barrier to entry is this restrictive permitting crap, and that's what creates the monopoly. That's the cronyism in this. Like I said, to even apply for a license under the LCB system, you have to give them a $5,000 application fee, which is non-refundable. So if you're not picked, you're out. You can't grow marijuana. That's how I-502 is. He says, and then he quotes me, also MMJ patients had their plant count and supply significantly reduced. He says, not by I-502, but I-502 make it so patients with depression, insomnia, okay, so yes, not by I-502. The incentive there was the highly taxed market of I-502. So they reduced the patient's plant limits and possession amount in favor of the highly taxed market of I-502. That's what SB 5052 was all about. They created felonies for juveniles for just simple possession under 5052. They created restrictive market and restrictive plant counts and restrictive possession amounts for marijuana patients. All of this to favor the I-502 market. Now, cannabis laws went untouched, unscathed in Washington for 13 plus years. And people operated without controversy for those 13 plus years. Yeah, a few people got arrested, a few people got raided, some people had more than their plant count amount, but very few incidents compared to now. And, you know, he didn't even address the issue that I brought up about how the Washington State narcotics divisions are spending more than most other states on plant eradication. There's an $18 million budget for plant eradication in the U.S., Washington State gets $950,000 of that. That's like twice as much as the average. So I think that's pretty significant to mention. He didn't mention that at all. And he says, if Washington laws just aren't good enough, I guess people will have to resort to doing damn near what everyone else in America has to do, grow pot illegally. Yeah, but now with this incentive that the government has of these monopoly markets, they're spending more on plant eradication and enforcement, and there's a lot more people going down, per se. Every year under legalization has meant that 5,000 instances where Washingtonians who consume cannabis weren't giving lifetime criminal records. But please do whine about my cancer-fighting friends in Texas and the terrible burden of legal, tax-free $150 ounces of 24% THC weed, of which you can purchase 3 ounces, can store at home. What? Okay, so up to 15 plants and 16 ounces. If you get that recommendation, not in Washington, you get half that now. Anyway, so the point here is that Texas didn't have good laws and doesn't have good laws. Washington did have good laws, and now they have less good laws. Their laws are far more restrictive than before, and there's a lot more people getting arrested now. And, you know, even, you know, for a short time, minors were getting felonies instead of misdemeanors. But the point of Washington, if you look at most of the regions in Washington, you know, cannabis possession, simple possession under an ounce, was a misdemeanor. And in Seattle, those misdemeanors weren't even being tried in court, right? Because of I-75. And Pete Holmes wouldn't even try those in court. He would throw them out. So compared to DUIDs, which have went up significantly, which I'm about to show you, that's a Class B felony. I would much rather have a misdemeanor or an infraction, as it was in Washington, than a Class B felony on my record. And those instances and those convictions have went up significantly in Washington since the passage of I-502 under their new DUID laws. And I'm going to show you that. I posted here, and he didn't allow it. He must have deleted it. So I'll show you my response. Yeah, he didn't. Whoever runs this page didn't allow it. But I do want to read Steve Elliott here. He says, and me and him aren't friends. We don't get along because he's an atheist. I'm a Christian. We have that disagreement. But Steve Elliott points this out, and he quotes Russ. He says, "I'll be the first to tell you that Washington's I-502 is the shittiest state marijuana legalization law in the country," unquote. And Steve says, "No, Rectal Russ, you're actually bringing up the rear as usual. When it would have mattered back in 2012 and every year since, you assailed those who pointed out its shortcomings and brayed endlessly and obnoxiously about how great it was. Nice try rewriting history, though lame." Anyway, and Rectal Russ, Reach Around Russ's response really isn't that important. It's just a basic monologue of, "Oh yeah, well I'm the best," and blah, 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 whatever. So I'll read you my response to Reach Around Russ here, since he's not going to allow it, obviously. Here we are. So this is my report on the fake news, and this is, actually, let me get to the Pot Monopoly site, because I mentioned that I would show the numbers of DUID arrests, which are still, even though he says they're down from 2014, he says they're down 10%, they're still much higher than they were in 2012, much higher. And the standard is not proving impairment anymore. Now it's proving a 5 nanogram excessive blood limit. So here's the numbers from the Washington State Patrol, and this comes from a report that I read at NPR, which he did not include. So in 2009, number of impaired driving cases received for testing, 4,800. 2010, 5,012. 2011, 5,132. 2012, 5,298. In 2014, that went up from 2012 to 2014 by 1,000 new cases. The total impaired driving cases received for testing, I don't know why I posted that twice. Oh, this is percentage of cases testing positive. For the carboxy THC compared to just THC, which is an increase of 36.3%, which is that 5 nanogram limit, what it's based on. And then I posted my sources here, which he failed to report on, which is why I think that it's lame that he didn't include the link, because these sources are important. And so they said, in fact, the total number of traffic fatalities has remained about the same since legalization. Still, traffic safety officials say the state call growing percentages of active THC in blood samples alarming, as a trend they say they're keeping an eye on. And this is where that comes from. And this is where the whole issue of minors getting felonies for simple possession came from Crosscut, which he did reference. This is one of the links that he did give. He didn't give any of the good links, and he didn't give credit for my material. But anyway, I'll correct him on this. I get a lot more views on YouTube than he does anyway. But the another issue that I didn't mention was that, where was that? Oh yeah, I was going to address his lambasting that he won't publish on that page. In fact, I think he's deleted it because I went to discuss, which is where those comments go, and it's not even pending, so it looks like they've deleted it. So I said, Russ Belville responded to my critique of his fake news media. He did not include a reference to the facts that I provided, just offers his own spin. You can find his response here. One thing that he said that I have blatantly proved incorrect is even before he responded, which is probably why he failed to provide a reference, is that DUID went up significantly since I-502. Reference this, and the NPR articles. I said, as for what he says I-502 was responsible for, which is versus what it wasn't, so the lingo in I-502 created monopolies, tax incentives, the LCB controlling cannabis, and an open door for legislators to capitalize on these incentives, which they did in SB 5052. Why is that significant? Because cannabis laws, which were generous, liberal, and without controversy for 13 years, went untouched before the highly regulated, costly monopolies went into effect. It was after I-502 that cannabis laws got effed up. Many of the issues, from pushing thousands of MMJ people out of business to increased DUID laws and arrest, are a direct result of I-502. Many of the other issues are an indirect result. So anyway, that's the content he left out. Peace.